Aysha Baqir. Aysha is a novelist, Michael is a poet. Let me just quickly introduce both of them, and then we'll move to their writings. Michael is the founder of the National Youth Poet Laureate Program, which is a leading literary arts program for young writers in America. And he's a recognized thought leader in the nonprofit sector and has received honors from the Ford Foundation and the Union Square Awards. His work has been featured on CNN, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and The Nation. And he's an educator, and he has advised the Boys and Girls Club of America and taught critical literacy and hip-hop poetics at institutions such as the New York University, Michigan State University, and the New School University and the University of Wisconsin. Aysha Baqir is going to read us a short essay, and it is called Zora, What If You Were My Daughter? And it was published in the anthology Mona Lisa, in the anthology called Mona Lisa No Longer Smiles by Om Books International India. And her debut novel, Beyond the Fields, was published in January 2019 by Marshall Cavendish out of Singapore and launched at the Singapore, Lahore, and Karachi Literary Festivals in 2019-2020, and Women in Literature Festival in 2021. Beyond the Fields was shortlisted for the best debut English novel at the 9th UBL Literary Awards and won the Literature Award of the Ladies Fund in Karachi in 2022. Her short stories have been selected for best-selling published anthologies, A View of the Stars, published by Marshall Cavendish, Mona Lisa No Longer Smiles, and The Gendered Body in South Asia, Negotiation, Resistance, Struggle. She is an Ashoka Fellow and recipient of the Vice Chancellor Alumni Achievement Award from LUMS, which is the Lahore University of Management Sciences. So the first thing I would like to ask both of our panelists, and I guess we'll start with Michael, is why do you write? What is the motivation for writing your poetry, Michael?
Yes, that's a great question, a difficult one. I think it changes over time, right? So as a young person, writing is just an incredible creative outlet, a way to be heard, a way to express yourself. And, you know, when I was growing up, we didn't have a lot of arts programs in the schools that I went to. Most of my sort of extracurricular activities were focused on athletics, which is very big. So when I started writing, it was just like a breath of fresh air, and it gave me a sense of meaning in terms of how I could relate to my experiences as a person, as a human. So, and then of course that evolves. Why do I write now? Probably because I like talking about all the amazing things that my daughter does. So, you know, like, you know, can go full circle.
Can everyone hear me? So I was privileged. I started writing in grade 4 for my teacher, who promised a packet of gum for every 2 pages in addition to the first 2 pages. So I was writing like 50 pages at grade 4. So that was sort of the launch. And then I continued writing, but it was more for development work until I relocated to Singapore. And that's when I realized that writing was almost a struggle and a way to share my thoughts about that struggle with the rest, with the audience, where they might be. And I think over the years, as I progressed as a writer, I found my space in this vast sort of, cosmos of writing. And I hope that, with my voice and the characters I define, that they bring a bit of fiction, but they also bring a bit of reality to what's happening around the world. Thank you.
I was trying to do the math. So how many packets of gum did you get per day?
Oh my God, my class fellows hated me. They were like, oh my God, you're bagging like 20, 30. And they used to be imported gum. I was in the American school, so she used to get it from the commissary. And there was no sort of imported gum. So either they were my best friends or either they hated me. But all my weekends were spent writing fiction stories.
And that led you to have a little shop of chewing gum?
No. I had it all myself.
Okay, all right. Michael, can we hear some of your poetry? First, tell us a little bit about what you're going to read to us, and then.
Sure. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'm really honored to be here, and I'm going to share a few poems that are part of a new collection of doas that I'm writing. So kind of inspired by duas, but also kind of my own sort of spin, my kind of modern white American spin on that, which kind of can give it its own type of interesting flavor, I guess, so to speak. So I'll read a few of these. The main character, so to speak, in many of these poems are my daughter. She wants me to read all of the poems about her, but I might just read a couple. That's her, Aya Fatima, right there. But I'll read this first one. There's a teacher that I go to, and he talks about this idea of the hijab that kind of builds up on our heart. You know, there's two kinds of hijab. You know, the hijab that we take out of modesty and out of reverence, and then the hijab that kind of accumulates over things that we might not want it to accumulate on. So he talks about how we need to remove this heart hijab. So this poem is called Dua to Remove the Heart Hijab. My daughter tells me that she wants to wear a hijab, so people will know she submits to the Lord that embroiders the best cloth, the supreme tailor, the one with the freshest drip, so wet, so drippy, my eyes are forever covered with a veneer of tears. The hijab, I tell her, is a metaphor of modesty. The hijab, if you abide with or without a hijab, means you're classy, means there is a grace about you aligned with the divine. When my wife walks into a room sleeveless and in control, every head turns but knows its place. That is because of her hijab. But this poem isn't about that hijab. This prayer, a star under a cloak, is about the hijab we put over our hearts. Our Rab of the hijab, forgive us for the words we use like burlap dipped in tar that smother the light within us. O Lord of the most light, Lord so lit, so light you are transparent, so light your eyelashes are jellyfish if they are eyelashes and not light. Give my girl guides named Noor or Luz. And when they wrap their heads or when they don't wrap their heads, who cares? O son of the sunnah, please make my daughter's heart unmodest. Make the pathway between her heart and her mouth a portal of pure light, and give her the strength to remove her heart hijab, a curtain covering glass from the image of you at the center of her. Thank you. Another?
Thank you. Sure. Why don't you read another one?
So this one is called Dua for the Best Translator. You know, and I just love in prayers when there's just this like way of describing the most grandiose of the most grandiose. Like, how do you even do that? You know, like Lord of the most light, like, you know, and it's just like everything is the most and the supreme, and it's like hard to like match that as a poet, like trying to describe that. So all you can do is sort of just like extend the metaphor, and so that's what I try to do sometimes in these poems. So this is Dua for the Best Translator. I met you, Lord, amongst so many tongues, where the strawberry skin looks like it can taste, in a palm forest planted by a poet in Hawaii, next to a pub in Birmingham, England, where everyone wanted to die. O Al-Azim, I spoke to you as Yahweh, as Yemayah. I spoke to you when the wave pulled me under with my mouth and eyes closed, and you spoke back. You understood that language. You understood what the monk told me when he squeezed my hand and looked down the throat of a flower. O teacher, you gave us prophets and poets, and they all spelled you different, and they all meant you the same. When Muhammad spoke of you, when Abraham sharpened his knife, when Mary wept and wept, when Siddhartha centered his Noor on you, it was all the same, O best of translator, O master of words that don't match but have the same meaning. There is a way to call your name in Karachi and a way to praise you on San Pablo Avenue. And I say 100 names of you in a language I only know in my heart. So I recognize you at St. Matthew's Church, at the Blue Mosque in Plum Village. I recognize you when we bend to you and love each other.
Thank you, Michael. Why don't we have Aysha read from her essay, and then we'll come back again to you, right? Aysha, please tell us a little bit more about, just tell us about your essay before you read it to us.
Thank you, Maniza. Assalamu alaikum. So on May 31st, 2020, Zora Shah, an 8-year-old domestic worker in Pakistan, was beaten to death by her employers. The incident took place 6 days before the death of George Floyd and the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement. Each year, over 1 billion children across the world experience physical and sexual abuse. So this is a letter to Zora. Dear Zora, I am sorry you are not Black. I am sorry that the police did not release the video of how your employers, Hassan Sadiq and his wife, Kulsum, caged you, abused you, and beat you to death for freeing a few parrots. I am sorry that no statues fell for you. I am sorry that your murder has failed to free over 8 million child workers in Pakistan, or over 250 million workers in the world. Zora, 5 days before you died, a Minneapolis policeman, Derek Chauvin, dug his knee into the neck of a 46-year-old Black man, George Floyd, for 9 minutes, ignoring the Black man's choked, "I can't breathe" last breaths. George Floyd's death sparked protest and outrage across the country. Tens and thousands of protesters marched into the streets of Minneapolis. The protest spread to over 100 cities in the United States, including New York, Philadelphia, and Washington. Within days, the movement Black Lives Matter transformed into a global struggle, an online revolution, and protesters surged out into the UK, France, Germany, Spain, and Australia. Gathering momentum, the crowds tore down statues of slave traders and white supremacists in many cities. Some of the biggest corporate brands pledged support to the movement, Black Lives Matter. Other companies fired their CEOs and executives for racist and insensitive remarks. Chauvin was charged for second-degree murder. Some countries and states forced the police departments to ban the chokeholds and neck restraints. Many cities outlawed the unannounced police raids known as no-knock warrants. The George Floyd Memorial Fund raised millions of dollars for his family, and his GoFundMe page was supported by over hundreds of thousands of contributors. George Floyd's crime was that he bought cigarettes with a counterfeit $20 bill. Zora, your crime was that you freed a few parrots. The day after you died, tweets and posts flooded the social media. Many even changed their profile pictures. A few days later, you disappeared from the news like the parrots you had released. The Ministry of Human Rights in Pakistan promised reform. Tweets hinted towards tweaking the outdated Employment Children's Act 1991 to include the child domestic labor to the list of banned occupations, while overlooking the far more dangerous kilns, mines, and mechanic shops. And today, thousands of children work in hazardous occupations. Zora, I'm sorry that the media and the ministers did not give your death more attention. Some renowned civil society members organized a protest, but less than 12 protesters showed up. Given this, there is a lesson to be learned from the family, friends, and community of George Floyd. Zora, when I read the news of your death, something inside me came to a standstill. I heard your screams, "Stop it, no more, enough." But the world offered no answers. I had not spoken. The words were inside my head, knowing and unforgiving. And with a sickening reality, a sickening certainty, I knew that the pandemic was not outside, it was within me. It's simpler for all of us to look outwards and condemn others. It absolves us. But the problem is not out there, it's within us. It's tiring and uncomfortable to look inside because we are part of the crisis. We're part of the complex social economic cosmos that perpetuates and feeds on discrimination, poverty, violence, and forces millions of children into forced labor. If we continue to be part of the problem, can we be part of the solution? Not if we exclude the poor and vulnerable populations from the decision-making process and appoint ourselves as their ambassadors or spokespersons. Not if we continue to excuse the culprits because they're rich, powerful, our friends, friends of our friends, or someone we do not want to offend. Not if we leave the millions of child laborers to be physically and sexually abused without taking any action. A progressive society rests on the voices of all stakeholders committed to the cause. Can the stakeholders working on human rights include the poor and vulnerable in conversations about their rights, even at the risk of losing their privilege? Some claim that the poor and vulnerable are uneducated, illiterate, unable to contribute toward the right decisions. Yet, in my experience of 15 years, I found that the majority of the poor to be bright, determined, resilient, and waiting for the opportunities and initiatives to improve their lives. Hence, the excuse becomes fallacy to control and manipulate vulnerable populations, and is strikingly like the justification of the East India Company and the British Raj to colonize the subcontinent. Have the colonized become the perpetrators? Our actions have a consequence, as does our apathy. Black lives do matter. The question is, do children's lives matter? Thank you.
So, having heard both of you read your first two poems and the essay that you just read, Aysha, I'll ask you once again, why do you write? It wasn't for chewing gum.
Well, I think I said before, I think it's a struggle. It's a struggle to make sense of the news around us that comes at us, and then we have to continue our lives. And it's almost trying to give attention to that. The pieces of news that come in every day, they haven't stopped coming. Even very recently, there was another case of a child being beaten, someone being beaten, and they're happening every few weeks, not just in Pakistan, all across the world. So I think it's trying to make sense and to give voice to that incident so that people don't just forget about it. This piece was picked up in Singapore, then was published in India, and now I'm hearing that they're republishing it again. So it's from my end, when I write, it's giving a voice to the struggle and to issues that go unnoticed. In my fiction writing, because people don't want to be inundated with social heavy issues, I realize that the conversations come to a stop when people want to talk about poverty or children being abused. Nobody wants to talk about heavy issues. So although this essay was sort of it was heavy, in my fiction writing, I try to make the characters interesting, the protagonists, so that the social issues are addressed, but within a framework so it leaves the person thinking, but not necessarily sort of very, drawn down by what's happening around us.
Okay. Michael?
Thank you for that essay. That was beautiful. For me, I think I'll probably answer this question, why I don't write. And it's connected to Aysha's essays. For the past 20 years of my career, I've had the privilege and honor to work with young writers. And the work that the organization that I work with does really creates spaces for the most marginalized youth writers of color in most of the major cities in the US. And as you said in your essay, these are probably the most prolific and talented authors that we've ever seen in our country. They are directly responsible for the resurgence of poetry readership in the US right now. And it's just like been an honor working in that field. And so, when people say they know I'm a poet, and they say, well, what are you working on? What are you writing these days? Most of the time my answer is I'm writing grants to support the organization. So it's a real treat to be able to write some new poems and have this sort of new inspiration. I really like to write project-based. So if I get this idea in my head that I'm going to write these doas, I'm going to write doas. If I get this idea that I'm going to write poems about spaghetti, then I'm going to write 100 poems about spaghetti. So it's really like that kind of compulsion that drives me to write, but also seeing how poetry has enriched my life really has diverted my attention, most of it for the past 20 years, to working with young writers and getting to experience what they have to say. So, which is actually why I'm here in Pakistan right now, still working on behalf of creating platforms for young writers to be heard, because I really believe that, the way that this forum has served me, I just want to share with as many people. And I believe that young people have the most to say. So if I can do that for the rest of my life, I feel like I'd be very blessed and have a great career.
So would you like to read us a few more of your poems?
Sure. And when I say I don't write that much, I don't think I published a book in 10 years. So
have you tried to write a grant rejection letter in rap?
That would be good. That would be good.
How would it go? Not to put you on the spot or anything.
I'm not much of a freestyler, but that's the beauty. Like, we literally have kids that could step up on the stage, and we could ask everybody in the audience to hold up one thing, whether it's a cell phone, a book, a samosa, and they could go off the top of their head in verse and include every single thing, and from a 16-year-old at that. But I am inspired by rap and hip hop. So this book actually is called Vacations on the Black Star Line, and it was inspired by an album by a rapper named Mos Def and Talib Kweli. And so I wrote poems inspired by each of the songs on the album. So I'm going to read the one that's also relevant to Pakistan, called Brown Skin Lady. If you cut someone off from their culture, they will die. My lady can trace her long finger like a terracotta branch through history's rich cemeteries and arrive at the prophet. There is no separation of church and state when your homeland is called the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. Where I'm from, we pretend that God stays out of our taxes and that culture is the alchemy that turns blood white. I am multiple selves, but I am white. I contain multitudes, but am still white. American culture is distinguished by whether you are born of old money, new money, or no money. I can trace my lineage back to my first loan. My family tree grows from a safe. It seems the most dangerous nation in the world has it right. All the ammo We drop over there, and the people are still alive as I polish off another eggplant parm. At the airport, they study my lady's passport and wonder where she has hidden the bomb. And I want to tell them, she doesn't hide the bomb. She is the bomb. So I like to put humor in my poems, as you can see. So I'll read one more. This one's a bit more controversial, very relevant, but I've seen it's uncontroversial here, but it's controversial where I'm from. And you know, everyone has differing opinions where we're from, but the opinion that I have is that if we kind of can create a space where people stop killing each other, then we can figure out what the next step is. So in our city of Long Beach, we worked for many, many weeks, almost 2 months, to inspire the city to have a resolution for a ceasefire, which is very hard to do in our country. So this is called Dua for the Forgetful. I get some water, my throat is killing me. Before each prayer, we appeal in your name, Bismillah, into two of your infinite names, most gracious, most merciful, God of Ibrahim, of Moshe, of Jesus. Where I'm from, I rise from the prayer rug and come to City Hall again and again to this salat, O As-Sameh, the all-hearing, to appeal to a mayor, a council member, 100 or more of us cupping candles in our palms or shining light from a cell phone, we come. And on the other side are half a dozen or so who are all heard by a mayor, a council member, strongly considered. Are these folks adjacent to something that I don't believe in, who try to change the meanings of words, but you can never change the names of you, O Al-Mujib, Al-Muqit, Al-Aziz. When we say our Lord is the greatest, these people with the same Lord as us align our submission with terror. But even when we see the images of 2 hands, 200 or 1,000 hands, not large enough yet to even clutch a pomegranate, reaching out from the rubble, there is no name for vengeance in our hearts. Instead, we pray to our Raqib, the watchful one, Al-Wadud, the loving one, Al-Ba'ith, the resurrector, for this to stop. These 99 glorious names of God, of Yahweh, of Allah, are given to us as maps. The name Al-Fatah, the supreme solver, the name Al-Adl, the embodiment of justice, the name Al-Hafiz, the guarding one, leads us to city halls, writes our names on petitions that call for peace. We risk nothing and we risk it all while they take our pictures on their cell phones for websites that weaponize and water down these systems of oppression. Those who follow the same God that Abraham followed, who I follow, forgive them. O Al-Ghafur, the most forgiving, O Al-Afu, the pardoner. They have forgotten that the first temple you built was a body.
Did you want to read any more poems? Have you written anything more recently than this one? Anything on Gaza? You mentioned the ceasefire
this
and
my
the resolution.
Gaza poem.
This is your Gaza poem. Yes, it is. So did you write it this week or in the last month? And
I read it actually after the city approved the ceasefire resolution.
yeah.
So there's a growing movement
Yes.
in the U.S. of that happening. While also feeling like we are in a time where it is dangerous sometimes to share those thoughts. I think that fear has clouded judgment oftentimes. So people that might suggest that ceasefire is the way to go can be conflated with something else that they are not. So it's really a tricky line to walk, as you can imagine, kind of sharing your views and being investigated for peace, for wanting peace. So it's tough.
By the time I left the U.S., which was on Wednesday, I think over 40 councils, city councils had passed the resolution for ceasefire. And it is indeed a growing movement in the United States. And I think, if anything, people are waking up, especially the young, and seeing things differently. So it's a hopeful moment in that way. So good. I hope you get a chance to read your poem in Long Beach.
Yeah, that would be a whole other can of worms, but
right on the street.
Right on the street.
Right,
Yeah.
like right on the street. Yeah.
I mean, there's people on both sides, and it's tough to live in a world where they're on two sides. I wish, like I said, the dua for the best translator is, I wish we could all be on the side of love, because I think we all pray to the same God or higher power. We just call that person by a different name.
Yeah. But it seems like none of that seems to matter, because we've had 2 decades and change of relentless bombing, and it ain't going to be a prayer that's going to make the difference, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and you feel powerless sometimes, when you can't directly impact what's going on with the other side of the world, and sometimes all you can do is pray. Unfortunately, you can't also control where your tax dollars are going, and tax dollars brought me here. So I'm grateful to live in a country that supports the arts and has envoys that travel the world for diplomacy.
Yes.
But also, there's military spending. If you don't, you kind of.
I believe the number is $16 trillion was earned by the weapons industry in the last 2 decades. $16 trillion. That's a lot of bubble gum, wouldn't you say? So, but if your body is the first temple, I don't think, I don't agree with you. I think that you can do a lot. It's your voice. You can raise it. Your voice is a powerful voice. Your poetry is powerful. Michael, I'm talking to you. and you can make a difference. More than anybody else sitting on this panel, you got the right color, you have the right gender, and you have the right nationality. The nationality I share with you, but the louder you are, the more chances we have that we can stop this genocide that's occurring, right?
And that's what I try to do. And and the youth, the next generation, are really the ones that are going to make the biggest change. I've kept on hearing over and over at this conference that over 65% of Pakistan's population is under the age of 30. Mm-hmm. So that means we have a generation that's going to be leading this country for the next 15 to 30 Karachi literature festivals. And what does it mean if we start now and create a stage for a 16-year-old to be up here speaking truth to power? Mm-hmm. But absolutely. And that's what it's a privilege also to be in my position to use my voice for change. And I acknowledge that as well. So, but it's also a privilege to be able to work on behalf of, helping create a pathway for the next generation of artists. And that's brought me so much joy too. And to see them, and not for nothing, but 4 years ago, we had a young poet read at the presidential inauguration in our country. Yes. So, and that poet came out of our program,
which is wonderful. And her poem was absolutely brilliant and moving. Yep. Amanda Gorman. Yes.
Yeah. And to have a space on a national platform of that to celebrate the United States and also be critical of it. I mean, she received thousands of death threats after that poem because I know her personally.
Yeah.
I've known her since she was 16. But that's just a beautiful thing. And I would love to get to the point where, you know, the young poets that come out of the Pakistan Youth Poet Laureate Program, which we're here for now, can be reading on the largest stages of Pakistan influence, whether that be politics, literature festivals, etc., because that's really where the change happens, you know, and that inspires more people to get involved.
Pakistanis have always been inspired by poetry, but the young of Pakistan have always written poetry and been inspired by that. Yeah. But you're talking about English poetry, and that's a great thing. Aysha?
Like, I think sometimes we focus, if we take a look at a situation, it's the worst situation going on in the world, and we look at it and we say, it's terrible, it's tragic. We're looking at that. At the same time, we're not looking at the best of the best situations that are also happening in many Islamic countries, and we're not drawing lessons from that, or not just Islamic countries, other countries, and we see, oh, how can we improve ourselves? So sometimes we have to look at both the situations to be able to just not look at only the heavy side, but also just the positive, the many positives that are happening, and then say, well, how can we become better people from that? And if it's all right, can I read another piece? It
yes,
has a
of
different,
course.
It doesn't have such a heavy feel to it, and I think maybe we should just
read it. Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Tell us a bit about it before you.
So yeah. I've just come back from Singapore. I lived there for 10 years, and I think it's an ode to my life, to my time there, and it's called Singapore's Secret Recipe. It was a tribute to the city-state for their Independence Day.
So let's have Michael read another poem, and then do we need a question and answer session to this session? Yeah. Okay. After your poem, we'll open it up.
Yeah, that's a perfect segue. I wanted to read this poem to my friend and colleague here, Lee, because he's a lover of diners, and you just read a beautiful food poem. And you know, one of my favorite content areas is food. I grew up in a restaurant where my dad is the cook, my mom is the waitress. My grandmother had a breakfast diner where she was the waitress and my grandfather was the cook, and so on and so forth. So this poem is called Rivers, and it's about the women in my family who are waitresses. The women in our family have rivers. My great-grandmother, my nana, my ma, all waitresses full of rivers. Fit a river into a vein and it looks like lightning or a supernova. Galaxies of rivers in the blood. When the clock strikes open, my mother opens up a new river. Chit-chat flows. Where I'm from, it was the rivers that turned everything. River to turn water wheel, to turn gears, to turn looms, to make textiles. Rivers make costume jewelry and silverware. The birthplace of the American Industrial Revolution, born from a river, rivering to Narragansett Bay, flowing past Town Beach where I learned to ride waves. Ma says, what does she got? She worked her whole life. What do I got? Varicose veins. I'm floating down the Patuxent River in a basket made of plastic straws, clear as our front windows, revealing me at 5 years old without a mistake. I'm flawless from the mouth of a river, despite every hurricane Gloria. The one behind her left knee is the Mississippi, the stream up the front of your calf, a tigress, rivers to the heart of darkness. All the kids at the counter have grown up. Everyone changes except the women with rivers. My great-grandmother, my nana, my ma, all waitresses full of rivers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Aysha. Do we have questions? We're opening the floor to questions now.
Hi, Aysha, Maniza, Michael. So just a question. It was actually very moving, kind of, hearing both of you. But going forward, when Maniza talked about specifically Pakistan, that it's 65% that you said that the children are under 30, Maniza, is that what you said? Okay. So going forward, if we see not only in Pakistan, but if we compare, globally, this is becoming more like a speech. But going forward, so we have the children in Gaza, we have children in Pakistan, we have children in most of the third world countries. And going forward, where most of the policy makers and the decision makers and the people who are working in human rights forums, their ages are about 60 plus. What's the way going forward? As in, yes, Aysha, you're writing. Michael, you're writing beautiful poems. But just a question, what's the way going forward?
I mean, for me, it's very clear. It's about creating more spaces and platforms for young people to be heard. It's like really that simple, because actually, I've luckily been able to experience it firsthand. My whole entire career has been about creating spaces for young people to express themselves and then creating platforms for them to be heard. When we started the program in New York City, the dream that we thought was unattainable was to have a young poet read at City Hall. It sounded like wild. And after the Youth Poet Laureate program was only 4 years old, the new mayor asked the Youth Poet Laureate to read at City Hall with the former president, Bill Clinton, and a big Broadway star, Harry Belafonte. And that young poet had more to say than anybody on that stage and got more press than anybody, more than the mayor, the New York Times, talk to them about the star of the inauguration. And that just snowballed to the point where we talked about Amanda Gorman getting to read at the U.S. Capitol, reading at the Super Bowl. She read at the Super Bowl, one of the biggest sporting events in the U.S. So it's about creating the space for that brilliance that Aysha talked about in her essay that we know is already there, and normalizing it. So 20 years ago when I was a young nonprofit leader in poetry, the only people that were recognized were old white poets that taught at NYU or Columbia. And guess what? 20 years later, the poets that are recognized are kids that were 16-year-olds 20 years before. Now they're teaching in the writing programs at Columbia and NYU. So it happened. It really does happen. And they're winning all the book awards. And the professors that kind of excluded them can't ignore them anymore. And hopefully if we can replicate this program in other places, that will happen here. We can't just talk about it. I've been to so many panels that have talked about the younger generation of Pakistan, but we don't see as many young writers here at the festival. So that will hopefully change. And next year, hopefully the 2 winners of the National Youth Poet Laureate program in Pakistan will be here at opening ceremonies reading with the Consulate General and everyone else who they invite. So.
Yes, thank you. I think I'd like to pick up on, Michael, you said it was very, I agree with everything you said. And I think I'd like just to pick up the point when you talked about normalizing. When you normalize something, you make it part of the process. So it's not like you're doing it once only. You make it part of the system so that the young adults don't feel that it's a special favor that you're giving them. It's part of the process. It's the way things are done. Their spaces for them are always just not by that once a year or twice a year, but they are permanent spaces that are theirs, given to them, for them, and they manage it themselves. I think that's really where, and I think just not in the arts. I think maybe the young folks need to be included in other processes of decision making. I have 2 young teenage boys, and sometimes I find that they are very clear about their thoughts about. I think they have less hypocrisy. I think they have less tolerance for abuse of human rights. So I think that if you allow the young people to come up, just give them a space, normalize it, you will find that they're taking the right decisions themselves.
I think with that, we'll give our panel a big hand. And I'll not say anything to your question, because I think we need to leave this panel on a happy note. I'm not so hopeful, but thank you very much. Thank you.